Hi there, folks. This is Jacob Sipkin. I'm coming at you from TZ Strength headquarters, now located in Seattle, Washington. I want to talk about a subject today that has been coming up in conversations with other coaches, other professionals in various fields, and that applies to conversations that I have with my athletes a lot. And this is a really important subject, regardless of the sport that the athlete is in. It applies to athletes of any level, recreational, general population, competitive athletes, so long as the athlete is an adult. And the subject we want to talk about is the coach's role and the athlete's autonomy. So we got to start with the question of what is the coach's role? The coach's role fundamentally is about creating a set of circumstances which allow the athlete to realize their self-interest. And this includes, obviously, program design, but it can be a broader scope as well. It includes mindset cultivation in some cases. It can include helping the athlete identify obstacles in their life day to day that might be getting in their way and helping them plan to deal with them. But the most important thing that I said was the athlete's self-interest. And the reason that that's so important is that if we want to coach in an effective and responsible manner, we first have to recognize that the athlete is an autonomous person. And part of our responsibility as coaches is to respect that autonomy. Fundamentally, we cannot respect a person's autonomy without respecting their own conception of their self-interest. As coaches, we're put into a situation where we have a degree of control over the athlete's ability to pursue their self-interest. That is, why they bring us on. The athlete has a self-interest, and they perceive us, the coach, as a person who can help them pursue that self-interest. In this position, it becomes really easy to superimpose our own conception of the athlete's self-interest onto our actions. And that's a problem because that interferes with our ability to effectively act out our role, which is creating a set of circumstances for the athlete to realize their self-interest. The reason that it interferes, or can interfere, is because if our conception of the athlete's self-interest is different from the athlete's conception of their self-interest, and if we allow our conception to become the one upon which we base our actions with regard to the athlete, then we're necessarily not serving the athlete's self-interest, because we don't determine what their self-interest is, the athlete determines what their self-interest is. Now, as a coach, or really as anyone, we're free to disagree with what the athlete's conception is of their self-interest, but really what we want to do here is make a distinction between self-interest and best interest. It might be the case that the athlete's self-interest does not line up with our conception of their best interest. But the athlete's conception of their self-interest has to be the one that takes precedence. Because if we don't do that, we are fundamentally treating the athlete like a child rather than as an autonomous adult person. For example, if you're raising a child, the parent's conception of the child's best interests, at least to a certain point, supersedes the child's conception of their self-interest. That's because we, generally speaking, assume that the child is not equipped to make decisions that are in their best interest. But when we're coaching adults, we have to assume that the athlete's conception of their self-interest lines up with their best interest more closely than anyone else's conception can, because the athlete, as an adult, as an autonomous person, is better equipped than anyone to determine what their best interests are. We as coaches might disagree, but fundamentally our role is to help the athlete achieve their self-interest, not our conception of their best interests. And then what does that actually mean for us as coaches? What do we have to do? The first and most important thing is that when coaching someone, you need to adopt the athlete's framework of their self-interest so that every interaction you have with the athlete is painted in that light. We have to, as much as we can, as coaches, bridge the gap between the athlete's conception and our own. So whenever the athlete communicates with us, we have to consider everything they say from their perspective to the greatest extent we can. Obviously, we're limited in how much we can do that, because they are another person with other internal experiences. They are their own consciousness, but we have to do our best to bridge that gap. Now, what that doesn't mean is that we acquiesce to all of the athlete's requests or demands, right? We're still in a position to make decisions. We're still in a position of authority. It's just that the authority is very specific to fulfilling our role, which once again is to create a set of circumstances which allow the athlete to realize their self-interest. And fundamentally, this is no different than any other job. If you hire somebody to paint your house, it's reasonable to expect that as a professional and an expert, they're going to make decisions about the approach to painting the house, the methods they'll use to paint the house, and that's totally within their scope and their purview. They are the expert. You hired them to do a job at which they are professional. But you did not hire them to choose the color that they will paint the house. Fundamentally, that decision comes down to the homeowner, and then the painter's job is to determine the best way to realize that goal, to actually paint the house that color. Coaching is no different. Our job is not to determine what the athlete's self-interest is. It is to listen to the athlete's conception of their self-interest, decide if we can help them achieve that, and then come up with a plan to meet those goals. And I said in there, we have to decide if we can help them achieve that. And that's really important, and one of the most difficult aspects of this is understanding that there's nothing wrong with turning down a client if your conception of their best interest does not align in significant ways with their self-interest. This can be really hard to do if coaching is your livelihood, especially if you're just getting started. I've been there myself. It's really easy to take on athletes no matter what because we have to make money like anybody else. But I would argue that we have a responsibility not to do that because if you don't turn down clients with whom you have fundamental disagreements about their best interest, it's going to be really hard for you not to superimpose your conception onto the situation and then to act in a way that does not align with the athlete's self-interest. And we have a responsibility not to do that. So guys, this is just a topic I've been talking about a lot with some folks, and it's something that I'm always thinking about when I'm interacting with my own athletes. Hopefully it's interesting. Hopefully it's something that you get some help out of. And thanks for watching.